Welcome back to 242 Math. I am your host, Raphael Thompson, and today we'll be looking at another important mathematics topic. It deals with properties of numbers. So we'll be dealing with all those properties: commutative, associative, distributive, identity, inverse. So all of those properties of numbers we'll be looking at, and at the end you should be able to figure them out. Definitions first. Commutative comes from the word commute, meaning to travel or move. Associative comes from the word associate, meaning to connect, link, or group. Distributive comes from the word distribute, meaning to share or spread. Inverse means opposite. Identity means sameness or the same. Now, once you know these definitions, they will help you to figure out what you are dealing with, which property you're dealing with. And I will further assist you with some more help for this, looking at the definitions. So for commutative, you can add or multiply in any order. For associative property, you can group numbers in any combination. For distributive property, you distribute or push through parentheses. And for inverse means opposite. For adding, you subtract. For multiplying, you divide. Identity property, the sum of 0 and any number is the number, or the product of 1 and a number is that number. Okay, the first one you have to look at is 2 plus 0 is equal to 2. Which property is this? Is it A, multiplicative identity, B, additive identity, C, additive inverse, or D, multiplicative inverse? Don't mind the big words. Don't let that confuse you. Multiplicative just means you're multiplying. Additive means you're adding. So, and we already dealt with identity and inverse. So you have to remember what identity means, sameness, and inverse means opposite. So take a guess if you don't know what it is right away, and see if you can come up with the answer. Right away, we know that we can toss out some of the wrong answers. Just put them in there to confuse you. So let's toss out A and D right away, and we'll pull them back up and see why we are tossing out A and D. A, multiplicative identity, you're not multiplying, that goes. D, multiplicative inverse, you're not multiplying. So you can toss those two out. Definitely you're adding. So that leaves you with B and C. Is it additive identity or additive inverse? Which one is it, guys? Is it identity or inverse? Remember the definitions. Let's see if we can figure it out before I show you the answer. Go ahead, give an answer. The answer is coming up. Identity or inverse? Here we go. B, additive identity. Excellent if you got that correct. You added 0 to 2 and you got 2, which is the same number. Remember, identity means the same. So that one is the additive identity, and you're adding. So that's straightforward. 2 plus 0 is 2. Any number plus 0 gives you that number. That's the additive identity. So you have to add 0. That's important. Okay, next one. 3 plus 2 is equal to 2 plus 3. Which property is this? Is it A, commutative property of addition, B, commutative property of multiplication, C, associative property of addition, or D, distributive property of multiplication over addition? Don't let the big words confuse you. Remember commutative or commutative, what it is, and then associative, what it is, and distributive, what it is. So see if you can come up with an answer by looking at the definitions. We will reveal the answer to you shortly, but try and figure it out first and see what you get. Let's toss out some of the wrong answers right away first. You are adding, so we can toss out B and D. So we have to take a look at B and D and see why we can toss those answers out. B is commutative property of multiplication. We're not multiplying, that goes. And D is distributive property of multiplication over addition. There is no multiplication sign in there anywhere. You are adding. So toss out B and D right away. Get rid of those two wrong answers, and you're left with A, commutative property of addition, or C, associative property of addition. Which one is it? You're adding. Is it commutative or commutative or associative? Which one is it, guys? Here we go. The answer is A, commutative property of addition. For associative, you remember you would have to have parentheses and there are none. Commute means to move, so we have 3 plus 2. Once you switch it around and make it 2 plus 3, it's the same thing. So 3 plus 2 is 5, 2 plus 3 is 5. It's the same answer you're going to get no matter how you switch the numbers around. So it's commutative. Remember, commute means to move. You can move them around and you would still get the same answer once you are adding. Next one, 5 times 1 is equal to 5. Which property is this, guys? Is it A, multiplicative inverse, B, additive identity, C, additive inverse, or D, multiplicative identity? Don't worry about the words. Remember, multiplicative just means you're multiplying. Additive just means you are adding. So let's toss out some of the wrong answers right away because we are multiplying. Let's see what we can toss out. Yes, we can toss out B and C right away. And you'll have to take a look at it and see why we are tossing out B and C. Remember, we are strictly multiplying. 5 times 1 is equal to 5. So B is additive identity. Yeah, that goes. And C is additive inverse. Yeah, that goes. You're not adding. So it has to be A, multiplicative inverse, or D, multiplicative identity. So let's get rid of B and C, guys. Can't be any of those. So it has to be multiplicative inverse, A, or D, multiplicative identity. Is it inverse or identity? Remember what inverse is? And inverse is opposite, or identity, same. Which one is it? Is it inverse or identity? Answer is coming up. Let's see if you can get it before I reveal the answer to you. Yes, the answer is D, multiplicative identity. You multiplied 5 by 1 to get 5, which is the same number. So once you multiply a number by 1, you would get that same number. 100 times 1 is 100. Remember, identity means the same. Once you get the same number, when you multiply by 1, you're dealing with the multiplicative identity. And the 1 makes it possible. Okay, next, 5 plus, in parentheses, 2 plus 1 equal, in parentheses, 5 plus 2 plus 1 outside of the parentheses. Which property is this? A, associative property of addition. B, commutative property of addition. C, distributive property of multiplication over addition. Or D, associative property of multiplication. Don't mind the big words. Remember, once you know the meanings from the beginning, you can figure out associative, commutative, or distributive. First, let's toss out some of the wrong answers right away. We are adding straight through. So, you are adding, so let's toss out C and D. Okay, those two just put there to confuse you. So let's see what C is and what D is. C is distributive property of multiplication over addition. You're not multiplying anywhere. And then D is associative property of multiplication. You're not multiplying. So we can toss those two out. It can't be C and it can't be D. So you are left with two possible answers. A, associative property of addition, or B, commutative property of addition. Is it associative or is it commutative? Which one is it? Okay, remember the definitions? Here comes the answer. Yes, answer is A, is the associative property of addition. You group the 2 and the 1 at the front, and then at the back you group the 5 and the 2. But if you add, you still get the same answer. 5 plus 3 is 8, or 7 plus 1 is 8. And note, parentheses are used, or we call them brackets, but they're actually parentheses. Parentheses are used for associative property, back and front. Next. 3 in parentheses, 2 plus 4 equals 3 times 2 plus 3 times 4. Which property is this? Is it A, distributive property of multiplication over subtraction? B, commutative property of addition? C, distributive property of multiplication over addition? Or D, associative property of multiplication? Which property is it, guys? Let's see if we can toss out some of the wrong answers right away. Let's toss out B, because numbers did not commute or move. And we can toss out D because you did not group numbers. You don't have parentheses front and back. So we can toss out B and D. B and D goes, which property is it? B is commutative property of addition, and D is associative property of multiplication. So it's distributive that we are looking at. So let's see which one is it. A, distributive property of multiplication over subtraction, or C, distributive property of multiplication over addition. Is it multiplication over subtraction or multiplication over addition? Look at it and you can tell the answer right away. You don't have to guess at this. Yes, the answer is C, distributive property of multiplication over addition. Why? You had to spread the 3 to get 3 times 2 plus 3 times 4, and you are adding. So you remove the brackets. Once you remove them, you're multiplying, and the plus sign is right there for you to see. Big and bold, plus. So it's distributive property of multiplication over addition. That's what you're looking at. And let's move on to another one. This one is 2 times a half is equal to 1. Which property is this? Is it A, multiplicative inverse, B, additive identity, C, additive inverse, or D, multiplicative identity? Which property are you looking at? And first, we'll look at it and see if we can toss out some of the wrong answers. And here we go. We can toss out B and D because the answer must have inverse in it, since a half is the inverse of 2. Remember, inverse means the opposite. So if it's 2, you have to multiply by 1 over 2 to get, that's the opposite. Which property is it? So we're saying it's inverse. So let's take out additive identity, B, and take out multiplicative identity. It doesn't have anything to do with identity. Identity means you get the same answer at the back, and you don't. So which one is it? Is it multiplicative inverse or additive inverse? Look at it and you can tell the answer right away. Just by looking. Which one is it? Give your answer. Is it multiplicative inverse? It is multiplicative inverse because you are multiplying, and the answer was A. So right away, you're not doing anything else but multiplying, so it has to be multiplicative inverse. 2 times a half is equal to 1. So remember, you're dealing with opposites, and if you have the number, 1 over that number would give you the multiplicative inverse when you're multiplying. Okay, the next one, 2 times 3 is equal to 3 times 2. Which property is this? Is it A, commutative property of addition, B, associative property of multiplication, C, commutative property of multiplication, or D, distributive property of multiplication over addition? Don't mind all the big words. You know how to break them up by now and find out what you're doing. So look at it, see if you can come with an answer. Let's toss out some of the wrong answers first to help you. So looking at it, you know you're strictly multiplying. So it has to do with multiplication. So let's toss out A and D because you only have to multiply for this one. You're not doing anything else. Let's see what A is and let's see what D is while we are tossing those answers out. A is commutative property of addition. You're not doing that. That goes. And D is distributive property of multiplication over addition. You are not adding anywhere in there, so it can't be multiplication over addition. So let's get rid of A and D. And that will leave you with B and C. B, associative property of multiplication, or commutative property of multiplication. You're multiplying. So is it associative or is it commutative or commutative? Which property is it, guys? Take a guess at the answer if you don't know. And here we go. Yes, the answer is C, commutative property of multiplication. The order of the numbers was changed and you're multiplying. So 2 times 3 is 6 and 3 times 2 is 6. So you just switch the numbers around. You're multiplying. So it doesn't matter which order you multiply, just like addition. This would be the commutative property and you get the same answer. Excellent job if you got that correct. Let's move on. In parentheses, 2 times 3, close parenthesis, times 5 is equal to 2 times open parenthesis 3 times 5, close parenthesis. Which property is this? A, commutative property of addition. B, associative property of multiplication. C, commutative property of multiplication. Or D, distributive property of multiplication over addition. Which one is it? See if you can come up with an answer before we work it out for you. Remember, look at it and see what you're doing. You're multiplying. So anything there to do with anything else except multiplication, you need to toss it. So let's do that right now. Which property is it not? Toss out A and D because you are only multiplying in the strictly multiplying, and you have parentheses back at the front and at the back. So let's look at A, see what that is, why we had to toss it, and let's look at D. A is commutative property of addition. Yeah, that goes, you're not adding. And D is distributive property of multiplication over addition. No addition sign in there for that. So get rid of A and D. That will leave you with B and C. B, associative property of multiplication, or C, commutative property of multiplication. Which one is it you're multiplying? Is it associative or is it commutative? Give an answer. The answer is coming up right now for you. Which one is it? Associative or commutative or commutative? Yes, you have an answer? Let's see if it matches to this. Answer B, associative property of multiplication. You can multiply in any order. So you grouped at the front 2 times 3 first, times 5, and then at the back you group 3 times 5. But just like with addition, if you do the groupings like that, you get, that's the associative property, you're associating or grouping, and you would get the same answer. 3 2 is 6 times 5 is 30, 5 3 is 15, 2 times 15 is 30, same thing. Now let's do 2 in parentheses 5 take away 3 is equal to 2 times 5 minus 2 times 3. Which property is this? Is it A, commutative property of addition, B, distributive property of multiplication over addition, C, associative property of multiplication, or D, distributive property of multiplication over subtraction? Let's look at the answers and let's see right away what we can toss out. We just put some answers in there to confuse you. So let's see if we can get rid of those and then see which one it is. So let's get rid of them one at a time. Which property is this? Toss out A. Why? Yeah, because you're not adding. Yeah, I don't see any addition sign there at all. I see a multiplication sign and I see a subtraction sign. So toss out that. So commutative property of addition, you have to go. So let's get rid of A, commutative property of addition. I don't see an addition sign, so that one would have to go. What you're left with is B, distributive property of multiplication over addition, C, associative property of multiplication, or D, distributive property of multiplication over subtraction. Is it distributive or associative? Which one is it? Remember the definitions and see if you can figure that out, guys, because we're going to get rid of one more answer before we end up with our answer. Is it distributive or associative? It is not associative because we don't have groupings at the front, parentheses at the front and the back. So you're not associating or grouping. So let's get rid of associative property of multiplication. It can't be that. So it has to be a distributive property we're looking at. Remember, the word distributive comes from the word distribute. Okay, which property is it? Is distributive property of multiplication over addition, or is it distributive property of multiplication over subtraction? Open your eyes and look and see which one it is. Which sign do you see there? Is it multiplication over addition or multiplication over subtraction? And the answer is D, distributive property of multiplication over subtraction. Yeah, you're multiplying and you subtracted. So when you remove the brackets, 2 times 5 minus 2 times 3, it says. The negative sign is right there, so you are subtracting. So it's the distributive property of multiplication over subtraction. Remember, distributive means you distribute or you're pushing through the parentheses, and that's what you get. Now, let's do a quick quiz and see if you know these. I hope you get 5 out of 5. Identify the property shown. 1, A plus B is equal to B plus A. We started simple, so you should be able to get this correct. Is it commutative, associative, distributive, identity, inverse? Which one is it, guys? Come up with an answer before the answer comes up. Here we go. Yes, commutative property. Once you got commutative, I'll accept that. But it's commutative property of addition, or commutative property of addition. Same thing. Good. If you got that one correct, commutative, A plus B, you switch it around and put B plus A. Remember, commute means to move or to travel. So that's 1 down. Number 2. A times 1 over A is equal to 1. Which property is this? Is it commutative, associative, distributive, identity, or inverse? Which one is it? Figure it out. Look at the definitions to help you. Commutative, associative, distributive, identity, inverse. Yes. Inverse. Remember, if you have A and you have 1 over A, that's the opposite of A. So when you're multiplying, so it has to be multiplicative inverse. And whenever you do that, you would always get 1. You multiply a number by its multiplicative inverse, you will end up getting 1. Same thing with letters. So I hope you got that correct. It's the inverse and it's multiplicative inverse. 3. Parenthesis. Open parenthesis. A plus B close parenthesis plus C is equal to A plus open parenthesis B plus C close parenthesis. Which property is it? Commutative, associative, distributive, identity, or inverse? Which one is it, guys? Let's see if you can come up with an answer. And I hope you would be getting 3 out of 3 so far. Yes, it's associative property of addition. Remember, associative means you group and you need to have parentheses. So if you group at the front A plus B and then at the back you group B plus C, it doesn't matter which order you do it, you would still get the same answer once you're adding. So it's the associative property of addition and you're adding the letters. So that's exactly what it is. Associative property of addition. It's associative. 3. 4 is 2, open parenthesis, A minus B close parenthesis, is equal to 2A minus 2B. Is it commutative, associative, distributive, identity, or inverse? Which property are we dealing with, guys? Let's see if you can come up with the answer before the answer is revealed. Yes, it's distributive property of multiplication over subtraction. You are subtracting, so it has to be the distributive property of multiplication over subtraction. Remember, you remove the parentheses or the brackets and you get 2 times A and then minus 2 times B. That's what you're getting, and so it's multiplication over subtraction. Distributive property multiplication over subtraction. Hope you got 4 out of 4 so far. Last one, 5. A plus 0 equals A. Commutative, associative, distributive, identity, or inverse. Which one is it, guys? Give an answer before the answer is revealed. And let's see if you would be able to get 5 out of 5. Which property is it? Here we go. Yes, you're adding. Additive identity. Remember, if you add 0 to any number or any letter, you would get that number or the letter. So A plus 0 is equal to A. If you add 0, you're dealing with the additive identity. Hope you got 5 out of 5 on that little quiz, guys. And that's the end for properties of numbers. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you learned something. If not, just go back over until you get it. Remember, you need to know the definitions to assist you to find the answers. But just look at it again, go through it, do the quiz again, and see if you can get it before the answer is revealed, and then you'll be okay.